Hey everybody, Model Man Frank here. I think I'm about 1 minute early starting this podcast. I guess we'll just wait a couple of seconds here and make sure that we turn over to um, to 7:30 exactly. But on my watch it says 7:30. We'll go by that one. Good evening. How is everyone doing? Hope if you're watching this on playback, please make sure you hit the thumbs up button. And if you're not a subscriber and you're new to my channel, please hit the subscribe button if you like the content. And hit the little bell icon. You'll be alerted when I have post a new short video or a new video altogether. This past weekend I went flying on Saturday. I took some video of my Viper returning to the air after so long being without a wing. If you guys watched the last video I posted about it, it bounced down the runway and tore the landing gear and tore the wing up. I didn't have any function whatsoever, and so that was a downfall there. So I didn't know what I was gonna do. I really didn't want to buy another wing for the plane, so I figured I would come up with a plan. My original plan was to fiberglass the wing and put very lightweight tissue paper style fiberglass down and then use resin to seal the deal. But my good friend over Fat Guy Flies RC, he had donated some parts to the club, and one of them was the wing for that aircraft. So when he donated it, I went down to the club and went to pick up that wing. And thank you, Fat Guy, for donating those parts to the club. The club got a nice, substantial little donation, and I got a new wing. So has landing gear now, and if you watch the video, you see I'll do a couple of flights. I'll definitely be trying to post more RC videos. You'll still see my normal shorts videos if you're a follower of those. I got some nice ones coming up. One of specifically of the Vulcan bomber. Man, the Vulcan bomber has this howl to it, so you'll see what short that comes out with that. In the aviation news this week, there really wasn't much. There's really not much to say about what's going on in aviation, but there is, with the election coming up, there's just not a lot being talked about. There's some things going on overseas. I saw Riyadh Air is going to be starting to fly 787s to Riyadh. I don't know what their schedule is going to be, but they did a couple of test flights with their aircraft. Their airplanes are painted black with the Riyadh symbol on the side of it. Also, Tail Heavy Productions came out with a new video about where is the future of hobby coming out. You may want to check them out. And if you're not a follower of them, follow them and do the thing. Press the bell icon. They put out some good material sometimes. Also, I posted a post on the YouTube page about my friend over there, Colin. He builds balsa wood airplanes. Not a lot of people do. Not a lot of people have picked up the hobby of really doing those types of builds, but he does, and it kind of does it in a nostalgic type way. And he has some really beautiful works of art that he does, and a lot of old Gillows kits and things like that. He just did recently. I noticed that he did a build. Hi Norm, how you doing? Of I think it was the Hindenburg, a Zeppelin, and it was all balsa. And I had no idea that there was a kit that was even balsa build. But it came out beautiful. It looked gorgeous. He had it laying down, and it looked really nice. I would love to see an actual build. I'm sure eventually he'll come out with actual build videos of him. Maybe even if it's pictured, take different pictures of your build and put them up on video, and that way we can see them. I would love to watch how you do your craft, and I'll share it if I get a chance. So today we're going to talk about. Last week we talked about the Century Series fighters that were used during Vietnam and how disastrous they were. They were ineffective aircraft, and some of the Century Series fighters were ineffective, mostly the Air Force ones. But the Navy versions were not. They were more effective in their bombing capabilities than the Century Series fighters were. Aircraft like the A7, the A4, the F4, the A7, the A6, the Intruders, the A5, which was the Vigilante. And specifically, what we're going to talk about tonight is a little bit about the F-8 Crusader. The development of the early service aircraft of the F-8 Crusader was from 1955 to 1957. That was the deployment and early service history of that aircraft. I'm going to read a little bit from my book here, and I'm going to show you some photos of the aircraft. Specifically some of the very first pictures of them that came out, and I'm going to show you guys a video of how, you guys, wow. I found some video of the USS Hancock shooting off their aircraft during the Vietnam War, and how low the tail end of the aircraft would sit to the aircraft carrier. The F-8 Crusader was an aircraft that the whole top wing would actually increase its angle. Actually, I'm going to bring the one that I have here, which is the model. So, as we're talking about the F-8 Crusader, the aircraft was radar guided, but it was actually considered the last of the dogfighters. It had 4 cannons. Okay, it had the option to carry missiles. Now, this aircraft, when it would take off, it would increase this front portion. This wing would actually tilt. So this would tilt up like this, so it would increase the angle of attack for the wing, and it would help the aircraft take off. Because when the aircraft sat on the ground, it was very low to the ground. It didn't have really a way for it to rotate like normal aircraft could. It needed to have this wing lift up a little bit to increase more angle, so more air would flow over the wing, allowing the aircraft to take off. So, I'll show you guys here a picture. Oops. My head is going to disappear while I'm doing this, so the picture's pretty big. I'm actually going to load 2 photos there so you guys can see. What the aircraft, specifically the one that shows the aircraft in its missile configuration with the wings up. As you can see here, the aircraft has the wings up. Now, something you're going to notice, I'm going to show you a production Marines version aircraft in Da Nang, and you're going to notice that it has some winglets on the bottom of the engine. They had to put those in because the aircraft had a tendency to yaw back and forth. And those winglets on the bottom of the motor of the engine of the aircraft helped with stability as the aircraft tracked forward. So, development and early service from 1955 to 1957. The F-8 Crusader, developed by Vought, first took to the skies in 1955. Entered service with the U.S. Navy in 1957. It was nicknamed Last of the Gunfighters, and you can really tell that it was really the last of Gunfighters. It was an aircraft that really was very good at dogfighting, specifically with the MiG-21 and the MiG-17s. It could pretty much almost outturn and outfly the MiG-17. The MiG-21, it was a little bit more, it had a more adversary fighter characteristics with the MiG-21s, though the MiG-21s were not used as much. The Russians were the ones that were flying the MiG-21s in Vietnam. The MiG-17s were mostly flown by the North Vietnamese and Chinese pilots that knew how to fly the aircraft. So it was one of the last American fighter jet designed primarily with guns as its main armament. Because after that, the F-4 Phantom didn't have guns on board. Its design featured a variable incident wing. As you can see, the way that the aircraft is sitting right now, it's got that wing would actually, lift up like that, to help improve the lift during takeoff and landing, off the aircraft carriers, and also during landing. And a Pratt Whitney J57 turbojet engine, allowing speeds of up to 1,000 miles per hour, which is Mach 1.8. So it was almost a Mach 2 fighter. It marked the transition phase in the military aviation. When this aircraft was taken out of service, it was literally one of the last dogfighters next to the F-14 Tomcat and F-16s. This aircraft was really developed. The Eisenhower administration approved this aircraft. So, tells you a lot there about how politics shapes how aircraft are developed. So, early Cold War contributions of the F-8 Crusader played a significant role during the Cold War, becoming a key component of U.S. Navy operations. It was equipped with 20mm cannons in the forward nose. As you could see in those that photo there of the Crusader, you can see the four cannons, and you can see the two cannons on one side, and it would have two cannons on the other. Let's take this image down, and I'm going to show you guys one that will actually show the aircraft a little closer. Deployment to the Vietnam area. Actually, it was Cold War contribution. The F-8 played a significant role during the Cold War, becoming a key component in the U.S. Navy aviation. It was equipped with 4 20mm cannons, air-to-air missiles, and guided rockets. So it had guided rocket capability. The aircraft really didn't carry pylons underneath the wings. It actually carried their armament on the side of the aircraft, on both sides. Very seldomly did you see any aircraft with armament on the bottom, specifically on this one. But it would carry missile pylons right on the side here, on both sides. That way you were able to fight your target, and you were more able to aim better. And that's what pilots really enjoyed about the aircraft. The aircraft was really a gunslinger type of plane. I'll show you this one here. This one here will be showing the aircraft landing on Ticonderoga. Show you a beefy up landing gear. Deployment to Vietnam, which this aircraft here landing on Ticonderoga, The first squadrons of F-8 Crusaders were deployed to Vietnam in 1964. They operated from U.S. Navy aircraft carriers in the Gulf of Tonkin, with the first strike group arriving aboard the USS Hancock. So this one was Ticonderoga and Hancock were in the Gulf. Shortly after the Gulf of Tonkin incident, the F-8s played a crucial role in combat air patrols, reconnaissance aircraft, air-to-ground support during the escalating of U.S. involvement in Vietnam. Now, for those of you that don't know when Vietnam really started, it was actually in the 1950s. Eisenhower started a police action where they started to bring in troops. They kind of like more were advisors, playing along. This was the UN's really second big war. It really was. It was more like a police action. So basically, they didn't have to ask for permission to go in from the Congress and the Senate. Kennedy was a one that actually ended up sending over 16,000 U.S. personnel to Vietnam first, and then LBJ, Lyndon Baines Johnson, increased that amount of troops that were going over to fight in that war. It kept being told to the American public it was just a conflict. We weren't really involved. We just had advisors there. In fact, we had the CIA operating over there. CIA was actually doing humanitarian airdrops to the different towns and villages that were all along the Ho Chi Minh Trail, and trying to win over the support of villagers to the U.S. and tell them where the Ho Chi Minh Trail was going to be done. So you can go into some more videos. I'll actually post an interesting video that you can talk. It kind of breaks down what's going on with the Vietnam War. But if you really want to know more, there's a couple of books out there, and there is the Vietnam in HD that was done by the History Channel. It is a very good video series, and I highly advise many of you watch it, especially some of you got younger guys that have never. I was born just as the war ended. I was born in 1974, so I really didn't know too much about. I read most about it in history books as I was growing up, and then I started to learn more about Vietnam when my father would buy me history and war books and aviation books. I read more about it and learned through social media. Actually, I'm sorry, not social media. That we didn't have social media growing up. Social media didn't come until like 2005, 2002. The videos like Vietnam in HD talks to the actual persons that were there. If you have a grandfather or a dad or anybody, they're the ones that were the first ones to really know what was going on. So it'd be wise enough if you have a grandfather, if you're watching this and you're under the age of 30 or under the age of 20, go to your grandfathers, or if you have a grandfather that was, or grandmother, because there were also women that served overseas, and this was a war that involved women. So it was a very somber war. It lasted 10 years. Again, most of it was talked about it was a police action, but it was a war. Back to Operation Rolling Thunder in 1965 to 1968. Operation Rolling Thunder was a series of attacks on the north. The Crusader saw extensive combat during Vietnam War, achieving high kill ratios, air-to-air engagements against MiG-17 and MiG-21 fighters. From early 1968 until the total bombing halt in October 30th of 1968, four acts Essex-class carriers operated in the Gulf of Tonkin with F-8 squadrons. The aircraft also undertook reconnaissance aircraft versions. The reconnaissance aircraft version, excuse me, my mouth is drying a little bit. Excuse me, I'm just going to take a little drink, guys. Bear with me one moment here while I hold the aircraft up. Ooh. Sorry about that. So the reconnaissance version of this aircraft, this whole bottom, from the guns were stripped out. This would be these fairings would be gone, and it was a square all the way down to about here. There were actual cameras placed around. There were two cameras here. One was a close up, and one was a both were telephoto lensed, and another set of cameras on the other side. So basically, as the aircraft flew over a target area, it could take pictures from both sides, and then it also had a downward-facing photo. One thing about the F-8 Crusader being used as a photo reconnaissance aircraft, it was able to penetrate at low levels, so it could get those really close-up shots of what they were looking at. During Operation Rolling Thunder, the SR-71 Blackbird, that is correct, the SR-71 Blackbird was being used heavily during the operations. It would go in, take photos, and then get out, and then after each operation, it would go in and take photos. These photos were being taken by the CIA. No one knew that the SR-71, what the SR-71 was flying. No one really knew about the aircraft until like late 1970s or 1980s. So the aircraft was taken off from Japan, and then it would fly into Vietnam, or it would fly from Germany. Excuse me. A little dry there. So the aircraft also undertook reconnaissance tasks with RF-8Gs variants conducting pre- and post-strike photo missions despite the risk. Notable losses included F-8s, reconnaissance F-8s, aircraft in the final months of Rolling Thunder. Nonetheless, the aircraft maintained a low combat rate throughout the war. Excuse me. With only 10 of the F-8s and 7 RF-8 losses. Now, there's no real, looking at my books here and books, stuff online, there's no clear indication whether MiG-21s or MiG-17s were the ones to shoot down those F-8 Crusaders. Again, excuse me. Actually, I'm going to leave my bottle of water up here. You guys can be okay with that. I'm reading my Vietnam book, and I don't see anything in here about the F-8s being shot down by MiG-17s or the MiG-21. They got into scraps with them, and they did shoot down a lot of MiG-20. Anytime the MiG-21s would get into a fight with them, they would be able to hold their own. But I'm assuming, this is an assumption, I don't know if this is true or not, that from what I see and what I've read, is that most of these downings of aircraft were either mechanical issues or navigational issues, or they were shot down by, ground fire. The U.S. Marine Corps operated the Crusader with units of VMF 232, the Red Devils, and VMF 235 Lancers out of Da Nang, sustaining only 2 combat losses in North Vietnam. And again, those were combat losses because We don't know what happened. Transition of newer aircrafts in the 1960s and 1976 happened. F-8's role gradually diminished newer aircraft like the F-4 Phantom. So the aircraft was doing such a good job, but it was such a workhorse during the early stages of Vietnam that by 1968 it was already starting to they were already starting to transition to the F-4s, which were all missile platforms. Again, it's kind of hard to have an entire missile platform in a war that has to have dogfighting skills. Now, you got to remember, MiG-21s, they had cannons on them. And so did the MiG-17s. They had cannons. I think theirs were 20 and 30 millimeter cannons. I mean, they were huge guns. The F-4 had a good kill ratio later in the war, but not in the early onset of the war, because the missiles, the fire control system on the F-4 they were still working the bugs out. Unfortunately, they needed this aircraft in combat, so they shipped it overseas. The F-8's role diminished as the newer aircraft like the F-4 Phantom, with all missile armament and great versatility, began replacing the Navy and Marine Corps. Despite being phased out, the Crusader's impressive combat record, speed, maneuverability earned it the distinguished place in military aviation history. The U.S. officially retired the F-8 from active service in 1976, but other countries were still flying the aircraft until the 1990s. Preferably, the Philippines and the French flew some of their aircraft up until like 1998. I mean, that's a long, distinctive career. I'm going to read something to you guys from this book that I have, and let me show you the book. Good book. If you want to, you can find it. You could probably find them used on Amazon, or go to any thrift bookshop online, and you could probably find it. I found this one on eBay. I had a book like this, but unfortunately I gave it to a friend of mine. I never got it back, so I had to buy another one. Luckily, I was able to find this one at a relatively good price. You can also find them on eBay. Look on eBay. Be careful on what you're finding. Make sure you're able to find them. But this one was still wrapped, and it's wrapping. I'm going to read you an excerpt in this book called Crusader Climax. And I got to look down to read, so you guys are not going to see much. One thing. After I'm done reading this, I'm going to show you guys a video of the F-8 Crusader, how it took off from the carrier. It was very interesting. I got this video from somebody online. And I'll put a link into of that video in the description box below, so you can go see some of the video of the A4. They have A4s in this video. They have the E1C tracker. I'm sorry, the tracer. Tracker wasn't known. And they have a couple other aircraft in there too. So, curtain call for Superstar. The final months of Rolling Thunder also brought the finest hour for the Crusader. From the beginning of 1968 through the total bombing halt, which finally clamped down on 30 October 1968, no fewer than 4 of the small Essex carriers were working in the Gulf of Tonkin. USS Bonhomme Richard, Hancock, Oriskany, and Ticonderoga. Each had 2 Crusader squadrons on board. In addition, the anti-submarine carrier Intrepid carried a small detachment of Crusaders to provide fighter protection. Furthermost, the large deck carrier, the USS America, had a detachment of reconnaissance Crusaders. The pilots who flew the post-strike photo missions of reconnaissance F-8 Crusaders continued to face risks and were not necessarily bound by President Johnson's directive. In other words, they were allowed to fly over into Hanoi. They were the only aircraft that were allowed to fly over Hanoi besides the SR-71, because no one knew the SR-71 was actually flying over Hanoi. No one knew that the aircraft. They actually talked. This is a totally not related story. Many years ago, there was a TV show that came out and talked about the exploits of the SR-71. There is a great book out there, and it's on Amazon. It's like $50 that you can order, and you can. It is the most in-depth book. I've always wanted to get it, but again, it's $50. I don't really want to spend $50. Much rather find it used. The book is the most extensive history and most extensive look at that aircraft, at the SR-71. It is a great book. And if you want to get the book, I'll put a link in the description box below. It takes you over to Amazon so you can see what the book looks like. Maybe you're better at finding it a lot cheaper than me. The guy who does it, he is an expert on the SR-71. Also, Airtime Publishing put out a book called Black Jets. It talks about all the black jets, black projects of Skunk Works, and specifically the SR-71 and the Oxcar, which was the missile version of the SR-71. RISI pilots, reconnaissance aircraft, like the F-8 and the F-4, were the only ones that were allowed to fly into Hanoi. Nobody else. SR-71s were flying over Hanoi, but they were flying over at 84,000 feet. Hanoi would be on high alert when the plane flew over. The Russians knew this was being conducted. There was nothing they could do about it. They could shoot missiles at it, but the SR-71 was fast. So, which between April and October limited strike missions to the lower part of North Vietnam, 2 RF-8Gs from the detachment's squadron VFP-63 were lost during the final months of Rolling Thunder. 1 from Ticonderoga on 28 March while over Laos, and 1 from Bon Richard on 22 May. The RF-8G pilots were among the privileged few who could still... It's very interesting that they say it in here. They were amongst the privileged few who could still fly over Hanoi and Haiphong. And it happened more than once that reconnaissance Crusaders sped out of Route Package 6. It was a route that they could fly through, with a MiG on their tail. The MiGs never shot at the aircraft because they were flying at Mach 1.8. They were full blast trying to get out of there. There is no record of a MiG ever shooting down a Crusader photo ship. However, and only 10 RF-8As and 7 RF-8Gs, the G version and the A version the A version had a different setup than the G version, were lost in combat over the entire war. Loss for Crusader fighters were also comfortably low. The aircraft had a great kill ratio. Pilots who operated the type with the Red Devils, the VMF 232s, and the Lancers, VMF 235, at Da Nang had a particularly good record with the aircraft. The Marines flew into the southerly route packages fairly frequently, but an entire war lost only 2 Crusaders. In North Vietnam, their excellent combat record could not prevent the occasional accident, however. So here they're saying that most of the loss of the aircraft was because of accidents. They're not really saying that it was because of being shot down from a MiG-21 or MiG-20 or a MiG-17. For the Navy, the end of Rolling Thunder brought low losses for the fighters, Crusader, and some very satisfying MiG kills. The Sundowners, VF-111, on the Oriskany lost an F-8C on 2 January, and VF-194 on Ticonderoga lost an F-8E on the 14th February. The F-8H from Hancock went down in 17 September 1968. None of these was claimed by a MiG, and a total of only 4 combat losses over a prolonged period of sustained operations was respectable figure indeed. So, really good book this is. It starts off the whole story of the Vietnam War from the French perspective. Again, I'll put the name of the book in the contents. Probably won't be tonight. I'll try and get to it tonight. They start with the struggle for Vietnam, the introduction, and they go throughout the whole book, and they go into a lot of the battles that happen. The Crusader, one of their best pilots for the Crusader was Commander R. Moose Myers. He had a very successful kill ratio on this aircraft. I'm going to show you guys a video now of the aircraft taking off from Hancock. The way that the aircraft takes off is really crucial. As I told you before, the plane had, and you saw in those photos, the aircraft's wing, top wing, would lift up. Also, these ventrals would keep the aircraft flying straight, but it did not allow the aircraft to rotate during takeoff. So the aircraft would sit like this in the ground. So I'm going to show you guys. It doesn't have any sound, guys. I really am sorry. There's no sound on this video. So let me pull it up. Media source. Here we go. I'm going to pull it up for you. You guys are going to get a real kick out of it. Nope. Not on screen recordings. Here we go. I'm going to show you guys a video of it taking off, and I'm going to show you a video of one coming in. But let's talk about the one taking off. Let me bring that one in. Oops. So, let me make this bigger. I'll play it back a couple of times so you guys can see. So if you look how the plane is sitting so low to the ground, see how the ventrals are actually sitting down? Okay, it's getting ready for takeoff. Now, here you can actually see the cannons on the side. You can see where, now that bulbous that's just above where the missile's tip is, that's the refueling probe. That actually would fold out of the aircraft and be used. Let me just put it on pause. Sorry, it's going to cover my face, so you won't be able to see me talking, but I'm going to talk through it. Actually, maybe I can make it bigger. Let's see if I can make it bigger for y'all, guys. Again, sorry, there's no sound. So there they're getting the aircraft set up. Now, funny enough, you do not see an afterburner. This aircraft did have an afterburner on it, but it didn't have the turkey feathers like an F-15 would. I mean, look how low as that plane is being rocketed. Let me see if I can bring it back a little bit. Hold on. Look how low the aircraft is sitting to the ground. That's like literally a couple of inches. Is that nuts or what? Look at that. That thing is, I mean, it was a plane with all motor. I mean, it was all motor. You were really, I mean, that plane was just like, wow. That's like, I don't know, probably about that much from the ground. So the aircraft couldn't really rotate too much until after it was in the air. Boom, it's in the air, retracts its wheels, and then starts to retract the wing. There's a crewman taking a break. But I thought you'd get a kick out of it. And now I'll put the longer format of that video. It's about an hour long. There's no sound to it, so you'll be able to really kind of take a look at it and see the different planes flying off the Hancock at that time period. But it's really interesting to watch from that time period. Most home moving cameras weren't like today, where they weren't like this big. I'm speaking to our Gen Zers and our millennial. Well, millennials, no. I mean, we didn't have stuff like this when I was bringing you guys, when my son was coming up. But Gen Zers, we didn't have little cameras like this. A normal home video camera was real, okay, and it was probably about that big. Some were about a little smaller because it would fit the 8mm reel inside. But they didn't have sound. So, you could make sound afterwards. You could buy a system to actually have sound, but some of them didn't have sound. So, I'm going to show you guys now one of it landing. You're going to take a special note to see the aircraft coming in for a landing, and you're going to see how the wing sits. You'll see the aircraft coming in from far away, and the wing is sitting up, but the nose is sitting like this. You'll notice that the wing is up and the aircraft is coming in. Show it to you guys now. Hold on. Just give me a moment. I gotta find the video. I don't know. Let's see if I can find it here. Video, here we go. Over here. I mean, I've got some videos in here I haven't cleaned out from the last couple of live shows that we did. Okay, here we go. Okay, that's an A4 that's landing. It's going to show a couple of A4s coming in. I'm going to bring it up a little bit so you guys can see it. So that's an A4 coming in after a mission. How it sets up and is coming in for the landing. That's an A4 also. You can always tell the A4 from an F-8. Now, I think the next one is an F-8. There's the F-8 coming in. You'll actually notice that the wing is kind of sitting a little higher. It's also helping with angle of attack for that wing and helping the aircraft slow down. The flaps are extended. His tail hook is down. His landing gear is down. And he's coming in. There he goes. Boom. Now, something really interesting here. Let's show you guys, see if I can bring it up a little bit more. You notice that the nose gear is flipped around. It was a free caster wheel. And what it means by free caster, and some of you who are pilots, you'll know what a free caster wheel is. For those of you that don't know, a caster wheel is like when you're at the grocery store and the wheel is moving around freely. You basically turn the cart and the wheels turn. That's what a free caster wheel is. It just sits on a pivot. So you're using your brakes, okay, in your main landing gear. So you'd hit one brake and the plane would turn. And then you would hit the other brake and apply power so you turn to the right or turn to the left. This aircraft had a free caster wheel. It wasn't until the F4 and then into the F-14 Tomcat did you get away from the caster wheel. The A4 also had a free caster wheel, I believe. I don't know. I got to look that up. I got to make sure. But I do believe they had a free caster wheel on that one. Just to give you guys a heads up, next week, I'm talking about next week now, we're going to talk about an aircraft that was developed for the U.S. Armed Forces. It was actually developed for the U.S. Army. Doesn't get really much fanfare, but it was used pretty extensively during the Vietnam War. It was also used during the Gulf War. And I'll bring out my Gulf War debrief, and I'll talk about some of the actions that it did. It's a counterintelligence aircraft. It looked like a dragonfly. The front of the aircraft looked like a bug. And we're going to talk about that aircraft. I'll tell you about it at the end of this video. So, that's the F-8 Crusader in a nutshell. I'm going to read to you guys one more paragraph from the book. So you guys, I'm going to read you a couple paragraphs of this one. It's called Crusader Kills. To Commander Lowell Myers, Moose was his call sign. Skipper of the VF-51 on Bon Richard. The Crusader was the warplane in which he had logged more than 1,000 hours whilst awaiting the chance for the ultimate test. It came on 26 June 1968. When Myers was one of a MiG-cap mission in the F-8H. Now, the F-8H had a little bit more horsepower coming off that motor, and it was a little bit more, it had different electronics on it. Was returning from North Vietnam when he got into a scrape with MiG-21s and shot one of them down using an AM-9 Sidewinder missile. Mayer's Screaming Eagles had been in the conflict since the Gulf of Tonkin airstrikes. The squadron, one-time skipper Jim Stockdale, was a POW in Hanoi. Hanoi had one of the most brutal hotels. It was called the Hotel, the Hanoi Hilton. John McCain was a prisoner of war there. Many other American pilots were prisoners of war there throughout the duration of the war. The generals that were there were brutal. And many of them, that's a story for another time period, but that's where they were. And the victory over MiG, the 113th of the war, was welcomed by all of VF-51's people. On 9 July 1968, Lieutenant Commander John B. Nichols III of VF-191 and the Hancock was flying escort for a reconnaissance flight, a circumstance which permitted him to be in the north. The only reason he was in the north is because he was flying reconnaissance. If you were doing that, you were allowed to be in that area. A circumstance which permitted him to be in the north of the 19th parallel bombing line. Nichols' fighter was with the call sign Feedbag 101 had become tangled in protracted protective flight with a MiG-17, a battle in which Nichols' adversary stunned him. He kept shooting the plane. So he used his F-8, got behind the MiG, and kept shooting bullets into the plane, and the plane would just not go down. He kept firing at it. Nichols moved into position and fired and unleashed a 20-millimeter cannon fire, saw the shells impact the MiG-17, and still could not bring it down. He closed in and fired again from point-blank range. Finally, the aircraft started to go down. The pilot ejected. you can just imagine you're shooting this plane. It's like you know, back in World War II, you're getting in behind a Spitfire. I mean, I'm sorry, a Hellcat is getting into a scrap with a Zero, and you're at a far distance and you're shooting at that aircraft, and it's starting to smoke. Pieces are flying off. The pilot is still pumping the aircraft, getting it to go. So he had to bring his aircraft in closer and then shoot the aircraft to be able to bring the aircraft down. There is no loss if the aircraft, if there's nothing here that states if the pilot ejected or the pilot died or perished in the shooting. Sorry, drink water here. Mouth is getting dry. I don't know why. It's just one of those days. It's one of those nights. I was really excited about giving you guys this tutorial on this aircraft. I really like this plane, and if you ever go online, I think I put it in the last video, in the link to the description. Hi Peyton, how are you? I put in the last description a video that you can watch about the F-8 Crusader. I will put more stuff in this one about the F-8 Crusader that you can go and follow links to watch the videos on this aircraft. This was a cream of the crop dog fighting aircraft. This plane dogfighted. It had guns, it had missiles, it had everything that it needed to defend itself and to defend anybody it was escorting. It was a pilot's aircraft. The F-4 Phantom started to become into its own later. It was the Israelis that were the ones that were like, why don't this airplane have a gun? That's why the F-4 later, during the war, they put the Vulcan cannon on the bottom, and it became a really deadly aircraft. But that's pretty much that's really not much here. The F-8 was in the RC realm. You don't see many Crusaders. They're probably harder to fly. This one here, unless you had safe mode in it, this one will never fly again unless I get another motor for it. The motor on this one disintegrated. Pieces just flew out of it. Plane's never going to fly. So the plane just basically sits in my office here and hangs above in the roll attitude. Excuse me. Next week, the aircraft we're going to talk about is called the Mach. Grumman Aviation developed it. They developed it with the task of selling it to the Air Force. The Air Force didn't want it, so they ended up selling it to the Army Air Forces, Army Air Corps. The Army had their own little Air Force, but it was mostly a reconnaissance and, ground support type of aircraft. The Mach was used mostly as a counterinsurgency aircraft. It would fly in, take pictures, was used in radar blocking. Later variants had pods, wing pods for tanks and things like that. It was used in the Gulf War, and it was used in Vietnam. We're going to talk about that plane next week. That's an aircraft that I just don't see anywhere where I've looked online. I know there's some videos that talk about it, but not a lot. I think Dark Skies, I think he talks a little bit about it. He doesn't really get too much into it, but whatever. We're going to talk about that plane. If you're living here in Florida, you go down to a little airport called Lantana down in Palm Beach. They have a couple down there. I don't know if they're still there, but about 10 years ago, they had a bunch of them. They had like 6 of them down there. They were sitting outside. I know Peyton flies, so if you take a flight down to Palm Beach, if you land at Lantana, which is also an uncontrolled airport, you can fly there and and you'll see these aircraft. They're huge. But we're going to talk about the development of the aircraft. We're going to talk about why it was designed for, and a little bit about its combat history. And its final deployment was with the first Gulf War. The reason I say the first Gulf War, there was 2 Gulf Wars. There was the first one, and then the invasion of Iraq, which was Operation Freedom, Enduring Freedom, whatever. And the first Gulf War, that was it. I'll get more into it next week so you guys can hear about it. Vietnam was a war that, it was an action that, it was, if you want to look at it and do it in comparisons, it was like Iraq. It was actually like us getting involved in Syria or Ukraine as of right now. That's what that whole view about was. Vietnam was one of those actions that a lot of men went overseas, died there, and never came home alive. A lot of men went there, men and women, went there and saw a lot of loss of life. They lost their youth, and they lost their innocence. A lot of people came back hurt from that war. It is not the same as playing a video game. I'm telling you right now, it is not the same. When you go to war, you come back with horrors in your mind that envelop you. And they stay with you for the rest of your life. So just remember that. To our younger followers, our younger viewers that are watching this. Us older viewers, you know what I'm talking about when we talk about this type of stuff. Guys, that's all I have to say about the F-8 Crusader tonight. Again, we will talk about the Mohawk. It's called the AOV or AO-1. Actually, it was the OV-1 Mohawk. Hi, Colin. How you doing? Hope you've gotten some more followers of your channel. It was a real pleasure to share you on my thing. I really wanted, I wanted to show some of the video that you guys put out. You put a really cool out video, and I like the way you did it. So, SST is coming along. I started doing the covering on the wing. Maybe I can show it a little bit video here. I mean, you can see a little bit of the wing right on the top of the screen there, right on the corner. There it is, right there. I can't turn the camera because you can't really see it too well. But this weekend, I flew my Viper, and I flew that wonky-looking aircraft there that looks like a Piper Cub. That's the Dynam Primo. I flew that one. I did some cleaning up and everything like that. Had to mow the lawn. Now that the times are changing, it's every 2 weeks that we mow the lawn here in Florida. So next week I won't have to mow the lawn. This week I had to. Something I was noticing, if you guys haven't read the B-52, one thing about the aircraft, we're talking about Vietnam. The aircraft, the B-52 has been flying since 1960s. I mean, that's a long time. There are pilots flying the B-52 that their grandfather flew in Vietnam. Can you imagine? So the B-52 is now being re-engined with quieter, more fuel-efficient engines from Rolls-Royce, of all people, to fly longer for another 50 years, probably, or another 25 years. It'll be the oldest bomber in the military arsenal once they are done re-engineering the aircraft. The B-21 Raider is still going through its development stages. I read a report that the military wants to buy like 100 of them. I don't know if that's true or not. When the B-2 bomber came out, they wanted to buy a whole fleet of them. They only ended up buying 21. There is a video out. You have to look for it. I'll see if I can find. If I find it, I'll put it in a post so you guys can, so I can share it with y'all. Of the B-2 bomber, and the guy has a video of the inside, which is not seen. There's not much video of the inside. Though in my book, Black Jets, which was published in the 90s, they do have a picture of what the aircraft is set up like. So, guys, thank you very much for watching. If you guys are going to watch this on playback, remember, hit that thumbs up button, number 1. Share the video, number 2. And to the non-subscribers, subscribe. Hit the bell icon so you'll be alerted when I go live every Sunday night at 7:30 p.m. right here. We'll talk shop talk is the name. The X-59. I'm not sure what is the X-59? Sorry, I gotta look it up. That's a good question because I've never even heard of the X-59. I've heard of the X-15. Oops. Oops. Is that Mach 1 bomb? That Mach 1 plane? You know what? I now know what one you're talking about. That's that supersonic or hypersonic aircraft that I don't know. I mean, it looks really interesting. I mean, I can't really tell you because I haven't really really looked into it. I mean, the concept is really cool and everything like that. But what's the point of the aircraft? It's to look up building a faster plane that's quieter. Didn't they already try that with the F-22 Raptor? It's supposed to be super cruise to make the aircraft more fuel efficient. I haven't really looked too much into it, but I will, and I'll give you my thoughts on it next week. How's that? So, it's a cool looking airplane. I mean, I saw a picture. You know what's interesting? If you look at the photo of that aircraft and you try and compare it to other planes, you'll see other adversaries that have an aircraft that looks similar to that one. As a matter of fact, the J-20 is a copy of an aircraft that was built by the Israelis using an F-16 frame. Think about that. Look at the J-20, the Chinese J-20, and then go look. I'll put a posting out about it. I'll take both photos and put them next to each other, and you guys make your own judgment. But I always told friends of mine that the Chinese copied the aircraft from another aircraft, even though it's heavier. You know, the J-20 supposedly weighs more than the F-16. They made it so they could get into a dogfight with the F-16, but I don't ever see that ever happening. Never know. Life is young, right? All right, guys, I gotta leave you. It's already time of that night. We all have to go to bed here on the East Coast or get ready for sleep because I gotta work tomorrow. Next week, we'll talk about the OV-1 Mohawk, and it'll be same time, same place. Guys, thank you very much for watching, and thank you very much for joining in. Colin, Peyton, and Norm. Sorry about my voice. It was a little dry today, but I hope to have it a little bit working more next week. Guys, have a great weekend. We'll see you on the next one. Model Man Frank out. Oops, wrong mouse.